All right, GCSE Geography fans, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Last time we were looking at hazards in general, but this time we're getting a little bit more specific.
Okay.
We're talking about natural hazards.
Oh, wow.
So all those incredible things you see on the news or in documentaries, like volcanoes and earthquakes and floods.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at all the different types of natural hazards. What makes some places more risky than others? And why this even matters for us, especially for GCSE Geography.
Sounds good.
So let's start with the basics. What makes a natural event a hazard?
Right.
I mean, you see a volcano erupting on a deserted island?
Yeah.
It's pretty spectacular, isn't it?
It is.
But is it really a hazard?
That's a really good question. It all comes down to the impact on people.
Okay.
So if a volcano erupts
Mm-hmm.
on a deserted island and there's no one around to see it, is it really a hazard?
I guess not really.
Not really, no.
Because a hazard is something that's going to negatively impact people,
Exactly.
their property, or like the environment that they live in.
Yeah, so there needs to be that human element.
Okay, so a volcano erupting on a deserted island is just a natural event.
It is.
But if it erupted, say, near a town on the side of Mount Etna,
Yeah,
then that would be a natural hazard.
exactly. Because now you've got people
Yeah,
and their livelihoods and their homes potentially at risk.
exactly. So let's talk about the different types of natural hazards.
Right.
So broadly speaking, we can split them into three main categories.
Right.
We've got geological hazards,
Okay.
hydrological hazards, and atmospheric hazards.
Okay, so starting with the Earth itself, geological hazards,
Yeah.
these are caused by the processes that are happening beneath our feet.
Like,
So think about tectonic plates. You know those massive plates that make up the Earth's crust?
Yeah.
They're constantly moving, they're bumping into each other, they're sliding past each other.
It's like a really slow motion bumper car game
It is a bit like that, yeah.
underneath us.
And sometimes that bumping and grinding can cause earthquakes.
Oh.
Like the ones we occasionally feel here in the UK.
Okay.
Or if those plates collide and magma rises up to the surface, boom, you get a volcanic eruption.
Wow.
So things like volcanoes and earthquakes, those are your classic geological hazards.
Right. And it's not just volcanoes and earthquakes, though, is it?
No, it's not.
We've also got things like landslides.
Landslides, absolutely.
So all that shifting and shaking
Yeah.
can make slopes unstable.
Especially after a heavy rainfall, you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
that saturation of the ground and suddenly, whoosh,
So anything to do with the earth moving and shaking is a geological hazard.
pretty much, yeah.
Okay, got it. So on to the next one.
Okay, what have we got?
Hydrological hazards.
Hydro meaning water.
Yes.
So these are hazards that involve the movement of water.
Right.
And the big one here, especially in the UK, is flooding.
Flooding, yeah.
Whether it's rivers overflowing their banks, coastal storm surges, or just intense rainfall. Overwhelming drainage systems, floods, can cause serious damage.
Yeah, I mean, we see flooding in the UK all the time.
We do. It's a
Okay.
pretty frequent hazard here.
Okay, so we've got the earth shaking hazards and the water moving hazards. What's the last one?
All right, so the last category is atmospheric hazards.
Okay.
Now, this is all about the weather,
Right.
specifically extreme weather. Think about powerful storms,
Yeah, yeah.
the kind that bring howling winds and torrential rain.
We get a lot of those in Britain.
We do, don't we?
Yeah.
You've got tornadoes as well, although thankfully
Yeah.
they're much less common here in the UK.
Yeah.
And then you've got droughts.
Oh, yeah.
Now, droughts might not seem as dramatic as a storm, but they can have a huge impact on agriculture, water supplies, all sorts of things.
Okay, so three main types: geological, hydrological, and atmospheric.
It's right.
But here's the thing that I've always wondered about.
Okay.
Why do some places seem to get hit harder by natural hazards than others?
That's a great question. And it's not just bad luck.
No.
It's about something called hazard risk.
hazard risks.
So it's not just about the event itself,
Yeah.
but it's also about how exposed and vulnerable a population is to that particular hazard.
Okay, hold on. Exposed and vulnerable. What do those actually mean?
Right. So exposure
Yeah.
is all about location, location, location.
Occasion.
If you live on the slopes of a volcano, you're naturally more exposed to volcanic
And
eruptions.
someone who lives miles away.
Exactly.
Right, yeah.
Same with living near a river. Your exposure to flooding is higher.
Right. So exposure is all about how likely you are to experience that hazard based purely on where you are.
It's just geography.
Okay. What about vulnerability then?
Okay, so vulnerability is a little bit different. It's about how well equipped a population is to actually deal with the hazard when it hits.
Okay.
So imagine you've got two towns, both in the path of a flood. One town has strong flood defenses. well-trained emergency services, and the people are well-educated about flood risks.
Right.
The other town has none of those things.
Okay.
Which town do you think is going to suffer more?
Second one for sure.
Exactly.
Even if they have the same level of exposure,
Right.
their vulnerability is different, which means the impact's going to be different as well.
Absolutely. And vulnerability can be influenced by all sorts of things. You've got social factors, economic factors, environmental factors.
Could you give us some examples?
Of course. So let's start with social factors. Something like population density
Okay.
plays a big role. If a hazard hits a densely populated city, the impact's going to be much greater.
Yeah, just more people in harm's way.
Exactly. You've got more people, more buildings, more infrastructure, potentially at risk.
Okay.
Then you've got education.
Right.
The more people understand about a hazard and how to prepare for it, the less vulnerable they're going to be.
So things like earthquake drills.
Yeah, earthquake drills in Japan, hurricane preparedness in Florida.
Okay, so social factors can really make a difference.
Absolutely.
What about economic factors then?
Right. So generally speaking, wealthier countries tend to be less vulnerable
Okay.
because they can afford things like better infrastructure, stronger buildings, better flood defenses, more advanced warning systems. They also have more resources to respond after a disaster has happened.
But I guess even wealthy nations can still struggle if they're not prepared,
Absolutely. Preparation is key.
or if they underestimate the risk.
Yeah, no one is immune to natural hazards.
Okay, so economic factors are really important.
They are.
And you mentioned environmental factors as well.
Yeah, this is where things get a little bit more complex because sometimes environmental factors can actually increase vulnerability.
Okay.
So, for example, deforestation
Right.
can make an area much more susceptible to landslides.
Because the trees hold the soil together?
Exactly.
Okay.
The trees help bind the soil. They act as a natural barrier. And when you remove those trees, you make the slopes much more unstable,
And if there's heavy rainfall,
especially heavy rainfall. Yeah, it can trigger a landslide much more easily.
and I guess we can't really talk about environmental factors without talking about climate change.
Oh, absolutely. Climate change is a major factor here. It's influencing weather patterns around the world. And we're seeing more extreme storms, more intense rainfall leading to flooding, and even more droughts in some areas.
So climate change is having a big impact on hazard risk.
It's a global issue.
Okay, so just to sum all of that up, we've got our three main types of natural hazards: geological, hydrological, and atmospheric. But it's not just about the type of hazard. It's also about exposure and vulnerability.
Exactly. Those are key factors.
And they play a huge role in determining the actual risk and the impact of those hazards.
Absolutely.
But the good news is, understanding those factors gives us the knowledge to make informed decisions
That's right.
and hopefully reduce those risks.
We can take action to protect ourselves
Exactly.
and our communities.
So I've got a question for all you GCSE Geography superstars out there.
Okay.
Imagine you're in charge of your town or your city. What steps would you take to reduce the risk from a specific natural hazard? So maybe think about flooding, because that's a big issue here in the UK. Think about everything we've discussed today: exposure, vulnerability, social, economic, environmental factors, and see what solutions you can come up with.
That's a great challenge. I look forward to hearing some of your ideas.
Me too. All right, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.